Imagine waking up to discover that the world you knew yesterday no longer exists, that alliances that seemed eternal are beginning to crumble, that the powers that dominated the global stage for decades are being challenged in unimaginable ways. This is exactly the kind of scenario being discussed behind the scenes of world geopolitics right now. A rumor circulates through news channels, social media, and international analyst circles. Russia has officially entered the conflict to confront Israel. We're not talking about indirect support, arms supply, or vague diplomatic statements. We're talking about a direct, bold move that could completely rewrite the rules of the international game. But before we dive into the consequences, we need to understand the context. Israel has always been seen as a militarily invincible nation, a country small in territory but giant in military capability, intelligence, and especially in the unconditional support of the United States. Decades of strategic alliances, billions of dollars in military aid, and almost automatic diplomatic protection at the UN have made Israel an untouchable actor in the Middle East. And it's precisely this perception of invincibility that makes the current scenario so disturbing. If Russia has truly decided to enter this conflict directly, this isn't just a military move. It's a symbolic declaration. It's Moscow telling the world the old rules no longer apply. The era of American hegemony is ending. Think about it. Russia isn't just any country. It's a nuclear power, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, and has a centuries-old history of challenging empires. When Moscow decides to act, the world pays attention. And if this action is directed against a central ally of the United States, the implications go far beyond the battlefield. Let's be clear, this isn't just about Israel or Russia. It's about world order. It's about who dictates the rules, who has veto power, who can intervene militarily without consequences. For decades, it was the United States and its allies. But what if that time is over? In recent years, we've seen signs of this shift. Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, openly defying NATO. China expanded its economic and military influence across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Countries in the global south began questioning the Western narrative, realizing there are other options, other partners, other worldviews. And now, if we confirm that Russia has decided to directly confront Israel, we would be witnessing the most traumatic moment of this transition. It would be like a dam that held back waters for decades finally breaking. And when that happens, no one knows how far the flood will reach. But why would Russia do this? What would be the motivation behind such a risky move? There are several theories. Some analysts point to the growing partnership between Russia and Iran, one of Israel's main regional adversaries. Others speak of a broader strategy to weaken American influence in the Middle East, a strategic region because of oil, trade routes, and geographic location itself. There are also those who argue this is a response to Western support for Ukraine. If the United States and Europe can arm and finance Ukrainian resistance against Russia, why couldn't Moscow do the same in other regions? It's a logic of retaliation, of an eye for an eye, that can transform regional conflicts into global confrontations. And here's the scariest point. No one knows exactly where this will stop. Wars have their own logic. They escalate, allies are called, red lines are crossed. What begins as a localized conflict can quickly transform into something much larger, something no one really wants but becomes inevitable because of the very dynamics of events. The United States is in an extremely delicate position. If they don't respond, they lose credibility. Their allies around the world will begin to doubt whether they can really count on American protection. Japan, South Korea, Poland, the Baltic states, all of them look at this scenario and wonder, if the US doesn't defend Israel, will they defend us? On the other hand, if the United States responds militarily, we're talking about a direct confrontation between two nuclear powers. And that's something the world has never seen since the Cold War. Not even during the tensest moments of that era did we come so close to a real confrontation between Moscow and Washington. That's why this moment is so crucial. We're not just talking about military strategy or diplomacy. We're talking about the future of humanity. We're talking about choices that can define whether the next decades will be of relative peace or devastating conflicts. And meanwhile, the world watches. Every country, every leader, every citizen is trying to understand what this means for them. Financial markets react nervously, oil prices soar, currencies fluctuate. People begin to stockpile food and supplies, fearing the worst. But the question remains, is this real? Or is it another exaggerated narrative, another sensationalist headline designed to generate clicks and views? This is the question we need to investigate with seriousness and responsibility. Because in times of crisis, correct information is the difference between panic and preparation, between irrational fear and conscious action. Now let's dive deeper into the economic consequences of this scenario. Because when we talk about geopolitics, we're not just talking about maps, borders, and armies. We're talking about your wallet, the price you pay at the supermarket, the gas you put in your car, the value of your currency, the stability of your job. The Middle East isn't just a region of ancient conflicts and religious tensions, it's the energy heart of the world. Approximately 1/3 of global oil passes through this region. The Strait of Hormuz, for example, is one of the most strategic routes on the planet. If something happens there, the impact is instant and global. Imagine this. Russia enters direct conflict in the region. Oil routes are threatened. Tanker ships stop passing through for fear of attacks. Suddenly, energy supply to Europe, Asia, and other parts of the world is interrupted or drastically reduced. What happens? Prices skyrocket. And when I say skyrocket, I'm not talking about a 10 or 20% increase. We're talking about doubling, tripling within days. Remember the oil crisis of the 70s? That paralyzed entire economies. Endless lines at gas stations, galloping inflation, recession. And that was just due to political issues and embargoes. Now imagine a real military conflict involving nuclear powers. But it doesn't stop there. Oil isn't just fuel for cars. It's the basis of practically everything in the modern economy. Plastics, chemicals, fertilizers, medicines, goods transportation. Everything depends, directly or indirectly, on oil. When the price per barrel goes up, everything goes up with it. Your food gets more expensive because transportation gets more expensive. Your electronics get more expensive because production and shipping get more expensive. Your electricity bill increases because many countries still depend on thermoelectric plants powered by fossil fuels. It's a devastating domino effect. And the financial markets? They panic before a single shot is fired. Investors hate uncertainty, and a conflict of this magnitude is the definition of maximum uncertainty. Stock markets around the world plummet. Investments are withdrawn from emerging markets and rush to assets considered safe, like gold and U.S. government bonds. But here's the paradox. Even the United States, considered a safe haven, suffers. Because even being the world's largest economy, they're not immune to global chaos. Their companies operate internationally. Their supply chains depend on global stability. And if the world enters recession, America enters with it. And then we have the currency issue. In moments of crisis, the dollar traditionally strengthens because it's seen as the global reserve currency. But what if this crisis questions precisely American dominance? What if countries begin to doubt the United States' ability to maintain world order? Then the game changes completely. For years, China and Russia have been trying to reduce their dependence on the dollar. They created alternative payment systems, increased their gold reserves, closed trade deals in their own currencies. If this conflict really explodes, it could be the catalyst that accelerates global de-dollarization. And what does this mean for you? It means your country's currency could devalue. It means imports get more expensive. It means your savings could lose value. It means economic instability and unpredictability. Now let's talk about something few people mention, the food issue. The Middle East is also a crucial route for grain trade. Russia and Ukraine together are responsible for a significant portion of world wheat exports. If Russia is involved in yet another conflict, this could further affect food production and export. Countries that depend on these imports, especially in North Africa and the Middle East, face the risk of scarcity and hunger. And when people have nothing to eat, revolts emerge, political instability, and massive migratory flows. Europe has already faced a significant migration crisis in recent years. A new conflict of this magnitude could generate an even larger wave. And we're not just talking about refugees fleeing war zones. We're talking about economic refugees, people who lose their jobs, whose economies collapse, and who desperately seek a better life elsewhere. This creates social, political, and economic tensions worldwide. Another critical point: technology. Many essential components for electronics, from smartphones to defense systems, depend on global supply chains that pass through strategic regions. If these routes are interrupted, global technology production can suffer. Imagine being without replacement parts for your car because the factory in Asia can no longer receive components coming from the Middle East, or your new phone being delayed for months because the production chain was interrupted. These are real and tangible impacts that affect the daily lives of billions of people. And there's more: trust. The modern economy works based on trust. Trust that contracts will be fulfilled, that trade routes will remain open, that currencies will maintain their value, that governments will act predictably. When this trust is shaken, everything collapses. Companies stop investing because they don't know what will happen tomorrow. Banks stop lending because the risk is too high. Consumers stop spending because they fear the future. And when this happens, we enter a recessionary spiral that's very difficult to escape. But let's be honest, it's not just the negative aspects that move the economy in times of crisis. There are sectors that benefit. The defense industry, for example, sees its profits skyrocket. Private security companies, cybersecurity, alternative logistics all find opportunities in chaos. And some countries, oil producers not directly involved in the conflict, may see their revenues explode with rising prices. But this is a dangerous game, because crises of this magnitude don't respect borders. What seems like an opportunity today can become a nightmare tomorrow. The fundamental question is the world prepared for this type of economic shock? The short answer is no. We're still recovering from the pandemic. Many countries are in debt. Inflation was already high before any new conflict. Supply chains are still fragile. An additional shock now could be the final push toward an unprecedented global economic crisis. And here we return to the essential question: is this real, or are we being carried away by exaggerated narratives that feed fear and speculation? Because if there's one thing financial markets love, it's a good crisis story. Because crisis generates volatility, and volatility generates profit opportunities for those who know how to play the game. But let's go beyond economics. Let's talk about the psychological and symbolic impact of this possible change in world order. Because wars aren't fought only with tanks, planes, and missiles. They're also fought in people's minds, in the perception of power, in the credibility of nations. For decades, the United States built its position as a superpower not just through military force, but through something much more powerful: belief. The belief that if you're an ally of America, you're protected. The belief that the United States will always be there when you need them. The belief that challenging American interests has too high a price to pay. This belief is what maintains alliances. It's what makes countries accept American military bases on their territory. It's what makes nations align their foreign policies with Washington. It's what transforms the dollar into the world's reserve currency. All of this is based on trust, on perception, on symbolism. Now imagine this perception being destroyed. Imagine the world watching as a crucial ally of the United States is directly confronted by a rival power, and Washington can't do anything to stop it. Or worse, decides not to do anything for fear of nuclear escalation. The damage wouldn't just be material, it would be existential. It would be proof that the era of Pax America truly ended, that there's no longer a single global sheriff, that the world has entered a multipolar phase where several players compete for power and where the rules are being rewritten in real time. And here's the crucial point: this doesn't happen overnight. It's a process. It began with the Iraq War, which undermined the moral credibility of the United States. It continued with the 2008 financial crisis, which showed the vulnerabilities of the Western capitalist system. It advanced with China's rise as an economic power. It accelerated with the American withdrawal from Afghanistan, which was seen as a humiliating defeat. And now, if this scenario is confirmed, it would be the final blow.
It would be the moment when the world looks and says, okay, America is no longer invincible. It's no longer the security guarantee we thought it was. And when that happens, alliances begin to unravel. Countries that were always loyal begin to seek alternatives. Treaties that seemed eternal are questioned. Military bases that were accepted for decades begin to be seen as unnecessary burdens. Think about NATO, for example. This military alliance was created to contain the Soviet Union. After the Cold War, it expanded into Eastern Europe. But it always had as its fundamental premise the idea that the United States would protect its allies. If this premise is broken, what's the point of NATO? European countries would begin to ask themselves, if the United States cannot or will not protect Israel, will they protect us against Russia? And this doubt by itself is already corrosive. It already begins to undermine the alliance's cohesion. And it's not just allies who are watching. Adversaries are too. China looks at Taiwan and thinks, if America didn't defend Israel, will they defend Taiwan? North Korea looks at South Korea and asks the same question. All tension points around the world become more volatile, more dangerous, because the perception of American commitment has been shaken. But there's another side to this story, a side that the West often ignores or minimizes, the perspective of the global South. For many countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, the U.S.-led world order has never been as beneficial as Washington would like to believe. They see American military interventions in the Middle East as disastrous. They see the selective application of democratic principles and human rights as hypocrisy. They see economic sanctions as tools of domination disguised as international justice. For these countries, Russia's possible entry into this conflict isn't necessarily something negative. It's seen as a challenge to the status quo, as an opportunity for a more balanced world where there isn't a single power dictating rules for everyone else. And that's why we see so many global South countries refusing to condemn Russia on previous issues. It's not that they necessarily support Russian actions. It's that they're tired of a system where only certain violations are punished, where only certain countries have a voice. This creates a fascinating and dangerous dynamic. The world is dividing not just along geographic or military lines, but along ideological and perceptional lines. On one side, the West, trying to maintain the order it established after World War II. On the other, a growing group of nations that wants to reshape that order. And in the middle of all this are ordinary people. People who just want to live their lives, raise their children, work, have a future, but who are being dragged into a geopolitical game they didn't choose and don't control. The anxiety is palpable. You see it on social media, in comments, in everyday conversations. People feel that something big is happening, that we're at a historic turning point. And this feeling isn't unfounded. We live in an era of transformation. The institutions that governed the world for decades are being questioned. The certainties we had are evaporating, and no one really knows where we're going. Some see this as an opportunity, a chance to build a better, fairer, more balanced world. Others see it as a threat, the collapse of the order that, despite its flaws, maintained relative peace between great powers for almost 80 years. And the truth is, probably somewhere in the middle. Change always brings both dangers and opportunities. The question is how we navigate this transition, whether we can do it peacefully and constructively, or whether we'll let old patterns of conflict and domination repeat, just with new actors. What's clear is that we can't ignore what's happening. We can't pretend everything will continue as it always has. The world is changing, and each of us somehow will be affected by this change. But here's the most important part. Amid all this uncertainty, amid all these narratives of crisis and conflict, we need to maintain clarity. We need to distinguish between what's real and what's speculation, between what's sober analysis and what's sensationalism. Because there are powerful interests that benefit from fear. There are entire industries built on anxiety and insecurity. And there are narratives that are amplified not because they're true, but because they generate engagement, clicks, audience. So, while we explore this hypothetical scenario, while we consider all these alarming possibilities, we also need to ask ourselves, what's really happening? What are the verifiable facts? Where's the concrete evidence?
And now we come to the heart of the matter. After exploring all these alarming scenarios, all these devastating possibilities, all these cascading consequences, we need to ask the most important question of all. Is this real? As of the moment this content was produced, there is no official confirmation, no formal declaration, no concrete evidence that Russia has declared war on Israel or sent troops to directly confront it. This is the plain truth that needs to be said in no uncertain terms. What we have are rumors, speculation, hypothetical analyses, narratives built on possibilities, not facts. And here's the problem. In the information age, the line between reality and fiction has become dangerously thin. We live in a time when a sensationalist headline can spread faster than the truth, where social media algorithms amplify content that generates strong emotion regardless of its veracity, where fear and anxiety are valuable currencies in the attention market. And this isn't by chance. There's an entire industry built on producing alarmist content. Channels that grow by talking about imminent crises, influencers who gain followers by predicting catastrophes, outlets that increase their clicks with apocalyptic titles. I'm not saying we shouldn't worry about geopolitics. I'm not saying the world doesn't face real and serious challenges. I'm saying we need to be critical. We need to verify. We need to question. When someone says Russia officially entered the conflict without hesitation or mercy, we need to ask, where's the source? Which government made this statement? Which reliable news agency reported this? Where are the satellite images? Where are the verifiable military movements? Because if we can't answer these questions, then we're not dealing with information. We're dealing with speculation at best and disinformation at worst. And look, I completely understand why these narratives are attractive. We live in times of great uncertainty. The pandemic shook our sense of security. Climate change threatens our future. Geopolitical tensions are indeed increasing. It's natural to seek explanations, to try to understand what's happening. But it's precisely in these moments of uncertainty that we need to be more rigorous, not less. It's when we're anxious that we're most vulnerable to manipulation. It's when we're afraid that we make the worst decisions. So let's recap what we actually know. We know there are real tensions in the Middle East. We know Russia and Iran have a strategic partnership. We know Israel faces complex security challenges. We know the United States and Russia have conflicting interests in various regions. All of this is true. All of this is documented. All of this is important to understand. What we don't know, what isn't documented, what hasn't been confirmed, is this specific narrative that Russia has entered a direct conflict to destroy Israel. This is a hypothetical construction, a what-if scenario, not an established fact. And why does this matter? Because decisions have consequences. If millions of people believe a false narrative and start acting based on it, the results can be very real. Market panic, hasty political reactions, unnecessary tensions between nations. Disinformation isn't just a theoretical problem. It's a practical problem that affects real lives. But here's something interesting. Even if this specific narrative isn't true, the exercise we did has value. Because by exploring this hypothetical scenario, we managed to better understand the dynamics of global power. We could see how the pieces connect. We could anticipate how different crises might unfold. This is what we call strategic thinking. It's looking at possibilities, understanding complex systems, preparing for different futures. But always with clear understanding of what's real and what's speculation. And here's my final message to you. Be a critical consumer of information. Don't accept narratives just because they're dramatic or because they confirm your fears and prejudices. Ask questions, seek multiple sources, verify credentials. When you see a video, an article, a post making extraordinary claims, pause, breathe, ask yourself, who's saying this? What's the evidence? Are there reliable sources confirming it? Or is it just amplified speculation?
The world is already complicated enough with adding layers of false information. There are already enough real crises without inventing new ones. There's already enough uncertainty without amplifying unverified narratives. And if you're worried about the state of the world, and you should be because there's much to worry about, then channel that concern productively. Educate yourself about real problems. Get involved in constructive solutions. Support quality journalism. Promote media literacy in your community. Because ultimately, the greatest power we have isn't military or economic. It's the power of the informed mind. It's the ability to distinguish truth from lies. It's the skill to think critically in a world saturated with information. The future isn't written. We're not passive passengers on a runaway train toward disaster. We're active agents who can influence the course of events, but only if we have clarity about what's really happening. So next time you encounter an alarming narrative about the end of the world, about imminent wars, about the collapse of civilization, pause, investigate, question. And remember, quality information is your best defense against chaos. We live in challenging times, yes, but we also live in times of opportunity. Opportunity to build better information systems, to create more resilient communities, to develop critical thinking on a global scale. The world is changing. It always has been. It always will be. The question isn't whether there will be change, but how we respond to it. With panic or with preparation, with fear or with wisdom, with credulity or with healthy skepticism. The choice is yours. And that choice, multiplied by billions of people, is what will really determine the future. So choose well, think critically, verify your sources, and never let fear replace reason. Because in the end, the most dangerous narrative isn't the one about wars and conflicts. It's the narrative that convinces us we're powerless, that we can't make a difference, that we should just watch while the world burns. That's the lie, and it's up to each of us to reject it. The future is still being written, and we all hold a pen.